Hey, spiritual extremists, it's Dr. Lloyd-Moffett, and we're going to talk about Teresa of Avila's view of the mystical journey as a marriage between the soul and Christ. And now that you know the background of Teresa of Avila, you'll see that her mystical marriage follows, in many ways, the example of traditional marriages. She says, stage one is falling in love. Think about what it's like to fall in love. It's one of those wonderful emotions. In fact, there was this time in college where I totally had a crush on this woman, Michelle, and I would be like, oh, let me see where I can run into you. And I remember one time I was like so nervous. I saw her down the way and I said, hey, Michelle, how's it going? She goes, oh, actually not great. I go, oh, I'm sorry. What's going on? And she said, well, and then she was like, oh, I can tell you, you have a sister. You understand these women things. And I, for some reason, just was like totally not paying attention. I was like, I get that way too, She goes, really? You do? That's not something that actually happens with guys. You go, oh, no, with me, I do. Yeah, I really do. And she's like, oh, okay, that's great. I'm like, oh, it's so good to see you. And I'm like walking backwards and literally there's like a garbage can. And after that embarrassing moment, I like fall and trip. Don't get into the garbage can, but it was pretty close. And that's totally what Theresa says is like the first stage of mystical marriage. You are falling in love with Jesus, and it's filled with giddiness and excitement and energy, nervousness, and sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain, because sometimes you want that thing and it doesn't quite work out. So let's listen to Theresa here. She says, the pain is great, although delightful and sweet. It seems to me the trials endured for the sake of enjoying those touches of his love, so gentle and penetrating, would be well worthwhile. We saw this other verse later because I think it's so funny, previously. But when his most wealthy spouse, Christ, desires to enrich and comfort the bride still more, he draws her so closely to him that she is like one who swoons from the excess of pleasure and joy, and seems to be suspended in those divine arms and drawn near to those sacred side and divine breasts. Awakened from that sleep and heavily inebriation, she is like one, and she is like one amazed and stupefied. And the idea here in the falling in love stage is that you are infatuated, but in the end, it's kind of shallow. You do not know that person well. You are just imagining that person, and what fuels it is the imagination. And yet what Theresa wants to argue is as you mature in that love, you move beyond infatuation and the beginnings of love into a deeper and richer understanding of love. That's stage one.